In this video, we will be looking at early muscle cars. This will not include pony cars, super stocks, their predecessors, or performance compacts such as the Nova Supersport. Just the mid-sized American performance cars that originated the term, starting with the introduction of the Pontiac GTO in 1964. Pontiac had recently built its reputation around performance models, and GM's ban on factory-backed racing shifted the focus from the track to the street. So using a loophole to work around the 330 cubic inch limit in the mid-size segment, Pontiac dropped the 6.4-liter 389 from the large Grand Prix into the smaller, lighter Tempest body. With the standard 4-barrel, it increased horsepower to 325. The $295 GTO package for the $2,500 Tempest Le Mans also included dual exhaust, bigger springs and front sway bars, improved cooling, an engine dress-up kit, simulated hood scoops, and wider 7.5-inch 14s. Options included tri-power, 3 2-barrel carburetors, bumping horsepower to 348, a 4-speed manual or 2-speed automatic, limited slip, attack, and additional cooling, handling, and brake upgrades. With a quarter mile in the low 14s, the GTO was a second quicker than the 280 horsepower 4-barrel 5.4-liter 326 Le Mans, and with a top speed over 130, it was easily 10 miles an hour faster. Styling was updated for 1965, as was horsepower, now 335 to 360, thanks to new heads and intake. Brakes were improved, and the upgraded shocks and sway bar became standard, and the new hood scoop could be made functional. Although weight was up and torque was down, acceleration remained similar with a slightly lower top speed. Advertising called it the Tiger, but it became commonly referred to as the Goat. Changes for 1966 were relatively modest, outside of it becoming a separate model instead of just being a package. And it was its most successful year, with sales being just below 100,000. In 1967, the engine increased to a 6.6-liter 400, but the tri-power option was discontinued. Horsepower was now 255 to 360, and a 3-speed automatic with a dual-gate his and hers shifter was added to the options list. The cars were restyled for 1968, being 6 inches shorter on a 3-inch shorter wheelbase, using a more rounded semi-fastback body. In spite of an Endura front bumper, weight was still up about 100 pounds. New options included hidden headlights and white wall or radial tires. The powertrain carried over, and standard horsepower was 350. The HO had 360, and the Ram Air 2 366. Performance remained similar, with the quarter mile in the low to mid-14s for the 4-speed, and under 16 for the automatic. And in an age before restrictions on dealer upgrades, Royal Pontiac in Michigan would drop in a 390 horsepower 7-liter 428 for only $650. For 1969, the HO engine was up to 366 horsepower and renamed Ram Air, although it is sometimes referred to as the Ram Air 3. Well, the top engine became the 370 horsepower Ram Air 4, but by this point, many horsepower ratings were questionable for various reasons. There was a new Judge package with a wheel and tire upgrade, spoilers, and graphics, raising the price another $330. A facelift for 1970 included an extended nose, making the car longer overall. The Ram Air 400 became the base engine, while the 7.5-liter 455 became an available option. Although horsepower ratings and overall performance were unchanged, and sales were down to just over 40,000. There was another minor facelift for 1971, and engines were retuned to better run on unleaded fuel. The base 400 was rated at 300 gross horsepower, or 255 net, and the top 455 was rated at 335 gross, or 310 net. But once again, overall performance was little impacted. For 1972, the GTO was once again an options package on the Le Mans, but only on the hardtop coupe. It included fewer features, adding just over $350 to the Le Mans' $2,800 base price. Horsepower was down to 250 to 300 net, but it was still a mid-14-second car with the 4-speed. Sales fell to under 6,000. The Le Mans was restyled for 1973, and the GTO carried on as an option package, still offered with the 400 and 455 engines, now rated at 230 and 250 horsepower, for a mid 15-second quarter mile and speeds around 110 miles an hour. The planned 310 horsepower Super Duty version did not make it into regular production, and sales continued to decline. So for 1974, the GTO became an option package on the compact Ventura. It included heavy-duty suspension with front and rear roll bars and cosmetic upgrades, including wheels and a shaker hood scoop. The 5.8-liter 354 V8 was marketed as a 350 and produced 200 net horsepower for a top speed of 120 and a quarter mile just over 16 seconds. It would be the final year of the original Pontiac GTO, but its initial success inspired others to follow suit, one of the first being the Oldsmobile Cutlass 442, being quicker to market as it was essentially an existing police package. It used the same 5.4-liter 330 cubic inch V8 as other Cutlasses, but with a heavy-duty valve train and a performance cam bumping horsepower to 310. It also included heavy-duty shocks, springs, bushings, control arms, clutch, pressure plate, steering box, and drum brakes. Other features included less restrictive air cleaner, dual exhaust, and 7.5-inch wide redline tires. It could do a 15-second quarter mile and 130 miles an hour, as a $136 package on a car that started around $2,700. Roughly 3,000 were made, including 10 four-door sedans. But Oldsmobile would take advantage of released restrictions for 1965 and moved up to a 6.6-liter 400, increasing horsepower by 25 and torque by 85, which knocked about half a second off the quarter-mile time, and sales climbed over 25,000. But it stuck with the 4-barrel 4-speed and dual exhaust that gave it the 442 name, sort of, as it could be ordered with a 3-speed manual or a 2-speed automatic. It was no longer available as a 4-door, but 3 versions of the engine were offered in 1966. A base 350 horsepower version, a W30 package which added a performance cam and cold air induction for 360 horsepower, and a tri-carb version with 3 two-barrel carbs, also providing 360 horsepower, with the W30 reducing the quarter mile to under 14 seconds. GM would ban multiple carburetors for 1967, but the 442 would get an available 3-speed automatic. The cars were restyled for 1968, shorter but heavier, and now considered a separate model, with a new under-square 400 sharing its stroke with the bigger 455, replacing the previous over-square 400. Standard horsepower remained 350 with the manual transmission, but the automatic-equipped cars were reduced to 325, and there was still a 360 horsepower W30 version, with a quarter mile of around 14 seconds. But the 442 was no longer the only Oldsmobile muscle car, with the introduction of the Hearst Olds. Sharing the same body, it was only offered in silver and black and powered by a 390 horsepower 7.5-liter 455, backed by a 3-speed automatic with a Hearst dual-gauge shifter, putting the car in the sub-14-second range. Minor changes for 1969 included a W32, which included the cold air induction without the performance cam, and the Hearst Olds moved to white and gold. For 1970, the 442 moved up to the 455 with 365 horsepower standard, and an optional 370 horsepower W30, which now used functional hood scoops. But the Hearst Olds was gone. Power was down for 1971 to 340 and 350 gross, or 270 to 300 net, still capable of a quarter mile below 14.5 seconds. But for 1972, the 442 became a simple appearance and handling package, using a standard 160 net horsepower 5.7-liter 350, although the 300 horsepower 455 W30 was still optional, and the Hearst Olds returned as an official pace car. The cars were restyled for 1973, and the 442 and Hearst Olds carried over, now in black and gold. The 350 came in 180 to 200 horsepower variants, and the 455 in 250 to 270 horsepower versions, making for a mid-15-second car. For 1974, both cars were offered with an 180 horsepower 350 or 230 horsepower 455. And the big distinction of the Hearst Olds for 1975 would be a T-top, although it would be discontinued after the end of the year. The 442 would carry on, however, with a new NASCAR-inspired aerodynamic front end, and was now available with the full line of Cutlass engines, including a 4.1-liter 250 Chevy straight six and a 3.8-liter 231 Buick V6. Then for 1977, the 455 was dropped, making the top engine an 185 horsepower 6.6-liter 403, and only with an automatic, making it a mid-17-second car, only for the cars to be downsized for 1978, offered as a fastback, and the top engine being a Chevy 5-liter 305 V8, pushing 135 horsepower with the 4-speed and 160 horsepower with the automatic, either doing a 17-second quarter mile. But the Hurst Olds returned for 1979, using the Cutlass Calais's more formal body, and being the only mid-sized GM coupe that year to offer a 350 and 170 horsepower W30 for a 17-second quarter mile, a package that would effectively become the new 442 for 1980, although the 3.8-liter V6 and 5-liter V8 remained available, which seemed to be the final year of the Oldsmobile muscle car, but it would be revived again for 1983, as the Hurst Olds for 83 and 84, now powered by a 5-liter 307 with 180 horsepower, which dropped to 170 horsepower in 1985 when it once again became the 442, lasting through 1987, making it easily the longest running of the original muscle car names, even if the muscle itself had faded. Chevrolet introduced the Malibu Super Sport in 1964, but it wasn't really a performance package. Its primary features included vinyl bucket seats, a center console with floor shifter, and an instrument cluster, costing just over $160 for the package. The standard engine was a 220 horsepower 4.6-liter 283, with an optional 5.4-liter 327 with 250 to 300 horsepower, which would be bumped up to a 350 horsepower version for 1965, a mid-14-second car with a top speed near 140. But the big engine muscle came at the end of the year, with the introduction of the Super Sport 396. The 6.5-liter V8 was offered in 325 to 375 horsepower tunes, moving it into the low 14-second range. The Super Sport 396 would become its own model with the updated styling of 1966, and the basic Malibu Super Sport was dropped, except for in Canada. With the restyle of 1968, a Super Sport 396 started around $2,900, and it was no longer considered a limited edition model. It would soon become an option package costing just over $350, so sales leapt from a few hundred a year to over 60,000, and for that year only could be ordered on the El Camino. But approximately 320 Chevelles were fitted with a 425 horsepower 7-liter 427 as part of GM's Copo Special Order program, including at least 99 Yenko Chevelles. The Chevelle would receive more updates for 1970, including a major facelift. The 396 was replaced by a 6.6-liter 402 with 350 to 375 horsepower, but the package was still marketed as the Super Sport 396. There was also a new Super Sport 454. Its 7.4-liter engine came in 360 horsepower or 450 horsepower LS6 versions, making for a mid-13-second car. The basic Super Sport package returned for 1971 using a 5.7-liter 350 with 245 to 275 gross horsepower, or 165 to 200 net. The Super Sport 396 was only offered with a 300 gross or 260 net horsepower version of the 402, and the Super Sport 454 had 365 gross or 285 net horsepower, still capable of a quarter mile in under 15 seconds. But horsepower would be down again for 1972 to 270. The cars would be restyled for 1973, getting heavier, with the simple SS now being a handling and appearance package. It could even be ordered on the wagon. It could be had with a 350 with 145 to 175 horsepower, or a 454 with 245 horsepower, now a high 15-second car. It would be the last year of the Chevy Malibu Super Sport, but the 454 would last a few more years. The last of the GM cars to enter the muscle car market would be Buick in mid-1965, with the Skylark Grand Sport. It included a 6.6-liter 401 with a heavy-duty radiator and dual exhaust. Marketed as a 400, it produced 325 horsepower and was able to do the quarter mile in under 15 seconds. It would get a styling update for 1966, and in 1967 would be renamed Grand Sport 400 to make room for the cheaper Grand Sport 340, using a 5.6-liter with 260 horsepower, which would be the basis for regional editions, such as the GS California, providing the muscle car look in a more practical package. There was a restyle for 1968, and the packages would be simplified to GS 400 and GS 350, indicating the move to distinct models, and the 5.7-liter with 250 to 280 horsepower, while the GS 400 was up to 340. But that would be replaced in 1970 by the GS 455 with 350 horsepower or a 360 horsepower Stage 1, the Stage 2 being a list of dealer-installed options to increase power. There was also an $1,100 GSX upgrade to the $3,100 GS 455, essentially a handling and appearance package, only offered in yellow or white with black stripes. Well, the 350-powered car was up to 315 horsepower and simply called the GS. But it would once again be a GS 350 for 1971, and horsepower was back down to 260, or 195 net. And the GS 455 was down to 340, or 275 net. But the GSX was now offered in a full range of colors. Then power would drop again for 1972 to 190 for the 350 and 270 for the 455 net. With the restyle of 1973, the Skylark would be renamed Century, but it retained a Grand Sport edition. The 350 came in 150 to 190 horsepower versions, and the 455 in 250 to 270 horsepower versions. The added weight making it a mid-15-second car. The 455 lost power again in 1974, down to 245 to 255, and would then be dropped mid-year 1975, when the base engine for the Grand Sport was a 3.8-liter 231 Buick V6, and the optional 350 V8 was rated at 155 to 175 horsepower, becoming the last Grand Sport for the time being. This was supposed to be just a single video, but due to its length and my time restrictions, I've had to break it in two. So look for the second half coming in about a week. And thanks for watching.